It was a chilly October evening in 2018 when I decided to treat myself to a solo movie night. The film was Hereditary, a horror flick that had been getting rave reviews. It was a weeknight, so I expected the theater to be relatively empty, a perfect setting for a horror movie. Little did I know the real horror was about to unfold off screen. I arrived at the theater just as the previews were starting. The place was eerily quiet, with only a handful of people scattered throughout the seats. I chose a spot in the middle of the theater, thinking it would give me the best view of the screen. As the lights dimmed and the opening credits rolled, I settled in, ready for a night of suspense. About 15 minutes into the movie, I noticed a strange sensation, like someone was watching me. I glanced round, but everyone seemed engrossed in the film. Shaking off the feeling, I tried to focus on the screen. That's when I heard it, a faint whispering, almost like someone was murmuring just behind me. My heart skipped a beat. I turned around slowly, expecting to see someone sitting there, but the row behind me was empty. Maybe it's just the movie, I thought, trying to rationalize the sound. But the whispering continued, growing slightly louder. It was unintelligible, like a hushed conversation happening just out of earshot. I glanced around again, hoping to catch someone in the act, but there was no one close enough to be the source. The movie was reaching a particularly tense scene when the whispering changed. It wasn't just random murmuring anymore. It was as if someone was calling my name. Anna. Anna. My blood ran cold. I whipped my head around, but still, there was no one there. The whispers seemed to come from very where and nowhere at the same time. Determined to shake off the unease, I forced myself to focus on the film. But the whispers persisted, becoming more insistent. I could feel my palms growing sweaty, my pulse quickening. Was I imagining things? I couldn't tell anymore. All I knew was that I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. Just when I thought I couldn't take it any longer, the figure appeared. It was during a particularly dark scene in the movie when I saw it out of the corner of my eye, a shadowy shape standing at the far end of the aisle. It was tall and thin, its features obscured by the darkness. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned to get a better look, but the figure had vanished. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, a trick of the light. But deep down, I knew better. The whispers grew louder, more frantic. Anna, come here! They seemed to beckon. Panic surged through me. I needed to get out of there. Grabbing my bag, I stood up and made my way to the exit. My steps were hurried, my breath coming in shallow gasps. As I reached the door, I glanced back one last time. The figure was there, standing in the middle of the aisle, its dark eyes fixed on me. I bolted out of the theater, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. I didn't stop running until I was safely in my car, the doors locked and the engine running. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing with what I had just experienced. Was it a ghost? A trick of the mind? I couldn't say for sure, but one thing was certain. I wasn't going back to that theater anytime soon. To this day, the memory of that night haunts me. Sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I can still hearth whispers calling my name. And I wonder, what would have happened if I had stayed? It was the summer of 2017, and I had just started a job at a small, old movie theater in a quiet town. The theater had been around since the 1920s, and its age showed in the creaky floors, faded velvet seats, and the musty smell that lingered in the air. Despite its rundown appearance, there was something charming about the place, and I quickly settled into my new role as a projectionist. One of the perks of the job was getting to watch movies after hours. One night, after closing, I decided to screen a classic horror movie for myself. The theater was completely empty, and the only light came from the flickering screen and the dim glow of the exit signs. I loaded the film reel and started the projector, then made my way down to the seats to enjoy the movie. As the movie played, I became absorbed in the story, forgetting for a moment that I was alone in the old theater. About halfway through the film, I noticed something odd. The picture on the screen seemed to flicker and jump, as if the projector was having issues. I frowned, wondering if the old machine was acting up again. I got up and made my way back to the projection room. When I reached the projection booth, I was startled to see the projector was running smoothly. There was no sign of any problem. I double-checked everything, scratching my head in confusion. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A shadowy figure standing in the corner of the room. The figure was barely visible in the dim light, but I could make out the shape of a man, tall and thin, with a faint glow around him. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just stood there watching me. I blinked and the figure was gone. I shook my head, trying to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, a figment of my imagination. But deep down, I knew better. The theater had a reputation for being haunted, and I had heard the stories from the other employees. The ghost of the old projectionist, they said, who had died in the theater decades ago. Determined to finish the movie, I went back to my seat, trying to shake off the eerie feeling that clung to me. The rest of the film went without incident, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. When the credits finally rolled, I hurried to shut everything down and lock up for the night. As I was locking the main door, I heard it, a faint whispering, like someone was speaking from the shadows. I froze, my hand on the key, straining to make out the words. "Leave now," the voice seemed to say. My heart raced and I didn't need any more convincing. I locked the door and ran to my car, not looking back. The next day, I told my co-worker Sarah about what had happened. She listened with wide eyes, nodding as I described the shadowy figure and the whispering voice. "That's the old projectionist," she said matter-of-factly. "He used to work here back in the 50s. Died of a heart attack right in the booth. They say he never really left." I laughed nervously, not sure whether to believe her or not. But the look in her eyes told me she was serious. From that day on, I couldn't look at the projection booth the same way. Every creak of the floor, every flicker of the lights made me jump. I never stayed late again, and I always made sure to leave before dark. Months passed and the memory of that night faded, but I never forgot the feeling of being watched, the whispering voice in the dark. Even now, when I think back on my time at that old theater, I can't help but wonder, was it really just my imagination? Or was the old projectionist still keeping watch, even from beyond the grave? It was a dreary November evening in 2019 when my friends and I decided to catch a late-night showing of the latest horror flick, The Haunting of Hill House. The weather was perfect for a horror movie, cold, rainy, and with a fog settling over the town. We were a group of 5, eager for a night of scares and thrills, and we chose the Old Est Theater in town for its rumored haunted history. We arrived just before the movie started, buying our tickets from the sleepy-eyed attendant and grabbing some popcorn. As we walked into the theater, I couldn't help but feel a chill run down my spine. The place was practically deserted, with only a few other moviegoers scattered in the seats. We chose a spot in the middle, close enough to the screen but not too far back. The movie started, and soon we were engrossed in the story. About 20 minutes in, during a particularly tense scene, I felt a light tap on my shoulder. I turned, expecting to see one of my friends, but there was no one there. "Did you guys see that?" I whispered, but they shook their heads, eyes glued to the screen. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just my imagination. But a few minutes later, I felt it again, this time more insistent. I turned quickly, but again, no one was there. "Cut it out, guys," I hissed, thinking they were trying to scare me. They looked at me, confused, clearly not the culprits. Trying to focus back on the movie, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The theater seemed darker than usual, the shadows deeper, and the silence between scenes almost deafening. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In the reflection of the screen, I saw faint outlines of figures standing in the aisle, but when I looked directly, there was nothing there. "Guys, something's really weird here," I whispered urgently. My friend Jess, always the brave one, stood up and scanned the room with her phone's flashlight. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing nothing out of the ordinary. "There's no one here but us," she said, trying to sound reassuring. Just as we settled back down, the movie's climax approached. The tension on screen was palpable, and we were all on edge. Suddenly, the sound cut out, plunging the theater into an eerie silence. We sat in stunned confusion, and then the whispers began. At first, it was just a murmur, like a breeze rustling through leaves. But it quickly grew louder, more distinct, and it seemed to come from all around us. "Get out! Get out!" the voices chanted in a chilling harmony. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could see my friends' faces reflecting my fear. We scrambled to our feet, huddling together as we made our way to the exit. The whispers followed us, growing more urgent. As we ached the door, it wouldn't budge. Panic set in, and we pounded on the door, desperate to escape. "Help! Let us out!" we shouted, but there was no response. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw them, the shadowy figures from before, now clearer and moving towards us. They were spectral, almost translucent, and their faces were twisted in expressions of agony. "Leave now," one of them hissed, its voice echoing in my head. With a final desperate shove, the door flew open, and we stumbled out into the lobby. The theater attendant looked up, startled by our frantic exit. "What's going on?" he asked, but we didn't stop to explain. We bolted for the exit, not stopping until we were safely outside, gasping for breath in the cold night air. As we stood there, trying to calm down, we vowed never to return to that theater. We never found out what exactly happened that night, but the experience left us all deeply shaken. Sometimes, when I'm alone in a dark room, I can still hear those whispers urging me to leave. And I wonder, what would have happened if we hadn't escaped in time? If you want to see more horror stories, check out my next video.